Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be tackling borderline personality disorder, BPD, today.
Okay.
And our source material is an episode from the I Can't Even Kill Myself Right podcast.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really gets into the terminology, the tools for managing those difficult moments, and even a mindfulness exercise. So we'll be unpacking all of that and more today.
You know, what struck me is how they just address the stigma head on.
Yeah.
They don't shy away from those challenges, but they also emphasize the strength, the resilience of folks living with BPD.
Absolutely. And right away, they jump into this whole idea of cluster B personality disorders and why BPD falls under that category. So maybe you could break down what makes cluster B unique.
Sure. So think of it like this. Cluster B is a group of personality disorders that often involve intense emotions, sometimes rocky relationships, and impulsivity.
Okay.
Now, besides BPD, this cluster also includes antisocial, histrionic, and narcissistic personality disorders. And that's why getting a professional diagnosis is super important, because there can be some overlap in symptoms.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why the quote from the podcast, if you live with the constant fear and shame of saying, I have borderline personality disorder with your out loud voice, that really resonated with me.
Oh, for sure.
It speaks to that internal struggle.
Absolutely. It highlights the fear of judgment that many people with BPD face, and it ties into those feelings of isolation and self-doubt that they mentioned later on in the episode, like that whole feeling of not mattering,
Yeah, and I think that's where the podcast really shines, because it acknowledges those really difficult emotions, but then it gives you practical tools to deal with them.
Right.
I was really interested in those hidden disability products they talked about.
Yeah.
What a cool concept.
Yeah. These products are designed to help someone communicate during a BPD crisis, especially when it's hard to put those feelings into words.
Oh, okay. So it's like a lifeline in those moments.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So can you walk me through some of those tools? I remember there were three, a wristband and lanyards and an ID card, right?
Right. So the wristband is very simple, but effective.
Okay.
It states, pause, I might be in crisis. So it's a visual cue for anyone nearby.
Ah, got it.
And then there are lanyards, which you can customize with messages like, I'm in crisis, please help me, or even, I'm nonverbal today. So it gives the person a way to communicate their needs without having to speak.
I see. That's so smart. And the ID card, that's the one that requests grace, right? That seems really important, especially during a crisis.
It is. The grace philosophy is all about de-escalating a situation and promoting understanding. Recognizing that someone in a BPD crisis might need extra time to process and that their emotions might be running high.
Makes sense.
Responding with judgment will only make things worse.
Right, right. And I remember they broke down the grace philosophy into 5 key points.
Yes.
But the one that really stuck with me was respond to needs, not emotions. That sounds so simple.
It does.
But I bet it's really hard to do in practice when someone's in a crisis.
It is, but it's also incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Because instead of getting caught up in that emotional intensity,
right,
you focus on what the person actually needs in that moment.
I see.
Maybe it's space, maybe it's reassurance, maybe it's just someone to listen without judgment.
Right, so it's like shifting your focus from their reaction to their underlying need.
Exactly.
It seems like it would make someone feel so much more heard and supported.
Absolutely. And the other points of the grace philosophy build on that idea, giving them time to process, asking what they need, confirming your desire to help, explaining next steps. It all contributes to a calmer and more supportive interaction.
Wow. It's incredible how something so simple can have such a huge impact.
It is.
It makes me think this grace philosophy could even be helpful outside of BPD.
Oh, absolutely.
What if we all just approached each other with a little more grace?
Right. It's a good reminder that everyone is fighting their own battles, and sometimes all it takes is a little understanding and compassion to make a world of difference.
Totally. And speaking of managing difficult emotions, I was curious about the mindfulness exercise they talked about.
Oh, yeah?
Awareness of thoughts, I think it was called.
Yeah.
I've tried mindfulness, but my mind just races.
Right.
How does this exercise work, and how can it help someone with BPD?
So this one focuses on noticing your thoughts without getting swept away by them.
Okay.
You find a comfortable position, tune into your breath, and when a thought pops up, you acknowledge it and let it float away, like a cloud.
Okay, that actually helps, the image of the cloud.
Yeah.
But how does that specifically help someone with BPD?
Well, people with BPD often experience intense and rapidly shifting emotions.
Right.
And this exercise can help them create space between themselves and their thoughts.
Okay.
Allowing them to observe those thoughts and feelings without judgment. It's about building that muscle of awareness and learning to respond rather than react.
So it's not about stopping the thoughts altogether.
Not at all.
But more about changing how you relate to them.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the easier it becomes to manage those difficult emotions and make conscious choices instead of being driven by impulse.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds really valuable, especially for people dealing with BPD.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered a lot already. Understanding BPD, those crisis tools, and even touching on mindfulness.
We have.
But the podcast had a really powerful ending too, right?
It did. There's a lot more to unpack in the closing thoughts, especially the message of hope and recovery.
Definitely. Well, let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. So, the ending of that podcast really stayed with me, especially that BPD mantra they shared.
Oh, yeah, right? I almost forgot about that. It was so powerful. What was it again?
It went like this. Dear BPD, I no longer have room for you to control my life. My warrior spirit will take it from here. It's about taking back control, refusing to let BPD define you.
And it's like a battle cry,
yes.
A declaration of independence from the disorder.
It reminds me of that resilience we talked about.
Yeah.
It's not about denying the struggles,
right.
but rising above them, choosing to fight for a better life.
And that fighting spirit is so clear in their Show Me Grace initiative. Yeah. They mentioned event line, career coaching, support groups. It's really amazing to see them building this network.
It is. It really emphasizes the importance of community, especially for people who often feel isolated.
Yeah.
Having a safe space to vent, get guidance, connect with others who get it, that can be life-changing.
For sure, absolutely. And they don't shy away from the importance of professional help either,
right.
Especially in a crisis.
Yes.
I remember they even gave out the 988 crisis hotline number.
Which is so crucial. Professional help can equip you with the tools and strategies to manage BPD.
Yeah.
And in a crisis, it can literally save lives.
Yeah.
It's important to remember you don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah.
Reaching out is a sign of strength.
It's interesting because we often focus on the negative aspects of BPD, the challenges, the stigma.
Yeah.
But this podcast really emphasizes the other side.
Yes.
The resilience, the hope, the resources. It's really refreshing.
It is. And I think the key takeaway for our listener is that BPD is not a life sentence.
Right.
It's complex. But with the right support, tools, and that warrior spirit, recovery is possible.
I love that. And, kind of switching gears here a bit.
All right.
What resonated most with you personally from all the tools and techniques that we've talked about? Is there one you'd like to explore further?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
There's so much good stuff in there.
Yeah.
But I keep coming back to that grace philosophy. Imagine if we applied that level of empathy and understanding to all our interactions.
Right.
Not just those involving BPD.
Yeah.
It could have such a positive impact on our relationships and communities.
I agree.
I'm definitely going to be more mindful of that going forward.
Yeah. How about you? Anything stand out?
Honestly, the mindfulness exercise really caught my attention.
Okay.
I've dabbled in mindfulness before, but the way they presented it, focusing on observing those thoughts without judgment, that really clicked for me. I think I'm going to try to incorporate that into my daily routine, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Even a little bit can make a difference.
Right.
It's about cultivating that self-awareness and responding thoughtfully to your emotions.
Absolutely. And, speaking of learning and exploring,
yes,
we always encourage our listeners to check out the source material themselves.
Oh, for sure.
There's so much depth in that podcast episode.
Absolutely. And if we kind of zoom out a little.
This episode reminds us of the importance of fostering empathy and understanding around mental health as a whole.
Yeah.
These conversations are vital. And the more we break down stigma and encourage open dialogue,
right,
the better equipped we'll be to support each other.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought.
Right.
The podcast emphasized the importance of community, especially for people navigating the challenges of BPD.
Yes.
So I'm curious, what steps could you take to connect with others who understand these challenges? Maybe explore the resources that were mentioned, join a support group, or simply have an open conversation with someone you trust.
That's such a powerful question.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that connection is essential, not just for those with mental health conditions,
right,
but for all of us.
Right.
Building that sense of belonging, of knowing you're not alone. That's incredibly powerful.
Beautifully said. And on that note, We'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the world of BPD.
Of course.
Remember, keep those conversations going.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.
It's interesting how this episode tackles such a heavy topic, but still with a sense of hope, you know?
Yeah.
It doesn't sugarcoat anything about BPD, but you definitely leave feeling like recovery is possible. What do you think makes that approach so effective?
I think it's that mix of vulnerability and empowerment.
Yeah.
You know, the podcast creators share their own struggles really openly.
Right.
Which makes everything feel so authentic and relatable.
Yeah.
But then they also emphasize the strength and agency of people living with BPD.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about being a victim.
Right.
But taking ownership of your journey and really fighting for your well-being.
I totally agree. And the tools they give you, like the grace philosophy and the mindfulness exercise, those really equip listeners with like practical strategies for everyday challenges.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding BPD.
Yeah.
It's about actually navigating it.
Exactly. And I think that's what really makes this podcast different.
Uh-huh.
It's not just information, it's empowering.
Right.
It gives you hope and a sense of agency, which is so important with something like BPD.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about empowerment, I was curious what you thought of that BPD mantra they shared.
Oh, yeah.
Dear BPD, I no longer have room for you to control my life. My warrior spirit will take it from here. What resonated with you about that?
What I really like is that shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It's not denying BPD exists.
Right.
But it's about not letting it run your life.
Right.
It's about reclaiming your power.
Yeah.
Choosing to fight for something better. And I think that warrior spirit is something we can all use, you know,
for sure.
whether we're dealing with BPD or any other challenge.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how important it is to seek support and connect with people and use the resources that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good reminder that you don't have to go through this alone.
Absolutely not. And I think that's a great point to end on. If you are struggling with BPD or any mental health challenge, please reach out for help.
Yes.
There are people who care, and there are resources to support you.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into DPD.
Okay.
We encourage you to check out the source material for yourselves and keep these important conversations going.
Yes, definitely.
Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
See you then.